First, I want to ask if in recent weeks, in recent months, recent years, have you been discouraged about the direction of our country? Have there been times where you have been concerned about the spiritual state of our country, the church in our country? And it seems that there's so much darkness, there's so much evil all around. Or maybe for you, the darkness has been much more personal and internal. And maybe you have battled through depression. Maybe even thought of ending it. If you can identify with any of those, the story of Elijah speaks to you this morning. And to understand where Elijah is at, you have to understand where he's been. And so I'm going to give a little bit of a recap if you haven't been here the past couple weeks. Elijah was this great prophet that God had called, and a prophet is one who speaks on behalf of God to the people. And God did great miracles through him. Elijah prayed, and God had stopped the rain. Elijah's passion was wiping out Baal worship. Baal was one of the pagans' gods that was worshipped, who was supposed to be the god of rain and storms, the god of fertility and life. And Elijah has devoted his life to showing that the God of the Bible, that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the one true God. And so as part of that, Elijah prays and it stops raining. There is a drought showing that God is in control of the wind and the waves, the storms. And he raises a young man to life. The first time that this happens in the Bible, God does it through Elijah. And then a story that we looked at last week. Elijah challenges 450 prophets of Baal, and they'll see who is really God. Is it Baal if he answers, or is it God, Yahweh, the God of the Bible, if he answers? And there are two sacrifices that are set up on Mount Carmel. And the 450 prophets of Baal, they dance all around, they cut themselves, they beg for Baal to send down fire of heaven, and there is no answer. The silence is deafening, and it's clear. And then Elijah prays, and immediately God sends down fire from heaven and consumes not only the offering, but the entire water-soaked altar that is there. And this is this great moment. The people fall down and cry out that the Lord is God. There is no more debate. Elijah has been longing for this moment when victory would come in this powerful and miraculous way, when his people, when his nation would see the error of their ways, when they would see that they had been going the wrong direction, and that they would turn back to God. And Elijah is on the mountaintop physically and metaphorically here. This is the peak. This is what he has longed for. God has shown his power. It's been a marvelous victory. And the victory is not over. Elijah is about to pray that God would send rain. That's where we pick up in verse 41. It's been 3.5 years since rain has fallen. And Elijah said to Ahab, "Go, eat and drink, for there is a sound of rushing rain." So Ahab went up to eat and drink, and Elijah went up to the Mount Carmel. And he bowed himself down to the earth and put his face between his knees. And he said to his servant, "Go up and look now toward the sea." And he went up and looked and said, "There is nothing." And he said, "Go again 7 times. And at the 7th time he said, "Behold, a little cloud like a man's hand is rising from the sea." And he said, "Go up, say to Ahab, prepare your chariot and go down, lest the rain stop you." And in a little while the heavens grew black with clouds and wind, and there was a great rain. And Ahab rode and went to Jezreel, and the hand of the Lord was on Elijah. And he gathered up his garment, and he ran before Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "So may the gods do to me and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." Then he was afraid, and he arose and ran for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, "It is enough. Now, O Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers." And he lay down and he slept under a broom tree. Behold, an angel touched him and said to him, "Arise and eat." Then he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on the hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, "Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you." And he arose and ate and drank, and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. There he came to a cave and lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. And he said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He said, "I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant. They have thrown down your altars and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I, only am left, and they seek my life to take it away." And he said, "Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord." And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great strong wind tore the mountain and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. The Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Behold, there came a voice to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he said, "I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant and thrown down your altars and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only am left, and they seek my life to take it away." The Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. And Jehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat, of Abel Meholah, you shall anoint to be prophet in your place. And the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death. And the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha put to death. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him." May God bless the reading of his word. Elijah has this glorious victory on Mount Carmel. And it doesn't stop with just the fire raining down. He prays, rain begins to come, and it says that he outruns Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel. Now, Ahab is riding in a chariot, and it's not clear. It's clear that God's hand is on Elijah's travel, that he is able to beat him there. And he goes to Jezreel, which happens to be where Jezebel is, which is interesting. Ahab is going back to his wife. Jezebel was the queen. Ahab was the king. Elijah believes that this has settled the issue. Elijah goes to Jezreel. He believes that this victory is clear and decisive. And when Ahab gets to Jezreel, this is in the northern portion, the northern kingdom of Israel, he tells Jezebel what had happened and how Elijah had killed the 450 prophets. And she is torqued. She's angry. She is not convinced. This is an affront to her personally, she feels. And so she swears that she is going to kill Elijah. There has been a refrain in the life of Elijah. Throughout these passages, you saw it some here. It says, and the word of the Lord came to Elijah. You'll notice in these first few verses of 19, it doesn't say that the word of the Lord came to Elijah and told him to go to Beersheba. It says that he was afraid. And he arose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah. Now, the reason that's a big deal, Jezreel was in the northern portion of the territory of Israel, the northern kingdom. Beersheba, it says, belongs to Judah, which is the southern kingdom. Elijah flees from one end of the country to the other. And he comes, and it says, and he left his servant there. And he went a day's journey into the wilderness. Elijah has quit. Elijah has given up. When he leaves his servant in Beersheba, the implication is that he is walking away from everything. And he walks out into the middle of the desert by himself, only wanting to be alone. And he prays, God, just kill me. Please just take my life. You think, how does this happen? Elijah had longed for revival in Israel. He had longed for Baal worship to be wiped out. And he thought that it was going to happen in this moment. What he had hoped for, what he had longed for, this good thing, it doesn't happen. And now in Elijah's mind, that incredible victory has turned into defeat. And remember, this man has devoted his life to being a prophet of God. He has devoted his life to serving God, to wiping out Baal worship. And now he says, I am no better than my fathers. I am no better than these pagans that have come before. Elijah says, my life is wasted. It's worthless. And I don't want to go on with it. And in the wilderness by himself, under a broom tree, it says, he asked that he might die. In today's terms, I think we would describe this as a bout of depression. The darkness feels so overwhelming to Elijah. He goes out into the middle of the desert to die, and it says that he laid down there. And I think when he lays down there, he doesn't expect to wake up. He doesn't hope to wake up. Maybe you have felt that sort of darkness on your soul. Maybe you felt the weight of that. I think sometimes when we talk about the Christian life, I don't think that we're honest sometimes about the struggle. And that depression is a real thing that affects believers. We talk about joy, and you can have joy. And there may be moments in your life where finding joy seems near impossible. If the man who raised the boy from the dead, if the man who prayed and stopped the rain for 3.5 years, if the man who called down fire from heaven, if that man can fall into this sort of pit of darkness, so can you. And so have believers throughout church history. One of the most well-known is a guy named Charles Spurgeon. You might have heard that name before. Great Baptist preacher from England. He was known as the Prince of Preachers in the mid-1800s. Still widely read today. Probably the greatest preacher who preached the English language. And Charles Spurgeon dealt with, at times, absolutely debilitating bouts of depression. If you've been there, if you are there, you're not alone. And there's hope. You notice God's kindness to him. God doesn't answer his prayer in that way. God sends an angel, a messenger, to provide food for him, to help him grow in his strength, to help him get rest and to eat. You see God's grace to him in this moment. When Elijah believes that he has nothing left and that he has nothing left to live for, God shows him mercy and grace and strengthens him. And it says that after that moment that he went for 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the Mount of God. You might recognize that name. Horeb and Mount Sinai are the same mountain. We've talked about this when we saw this in the life of Moses. Horeb, we believe, was either one side of the mountain, and Sinai is the reference to the other side. Or there's twin peaks there, and one part of the peak is Horeb, and the other peak is Sinai. But the Bible makes clear that this is the same mountain. This is the mountain where God appeared to Moses in the burning bush. This is the mountain where God appeared to Moses and gave him the 10 Commandments. This is the mountain where God has showed himself in power and revealed his glory to his servants, to his prophets. And now Elijah has gone there. This is far outside of Elijah's territory. This is the opposite direction of where his ministry had been. But he goes there to meet with God. And he goes and he hides in a cave. And God comes to him and says, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" When God asks these kind of questions, God's not looking for information. He knows how Elijah got there. He knows Elijah's heart. He knows exactly why Elijah's here. But he is trying to draw it out of him. And Elijah points out that his passion has been for the glory of God, that he has been jealous for the Lord, that he has opposed Baal worship, and he has sought to bring back the people who had forsaken the covenants and thrown down the altars and killed the prophets. Elijah says, "I have given my life to serve you. And now I am the only one left. I am the only one that worships God left. And now they're trying to take my life away." Elijah, that great victory that he had hoped for, that Mount Carmel would be this great revival, this spark that set alight the whole nation and turned them back to God, it didn't happen the way he thought it would. And in fact, he feels like he is completely and utterly alone and hopeless. So God says, "I want you to do something. Go out on the mountain." And it comes, and the Lord passes by, and there's this tornado, this windstorm that comes, and it's so harsh that it breaks the rocks on the mountain. But it says that God was not in the wind. There's an earthquake after that, and then there's fire after that. You get the picture here. These are very powerful manifestations. These are very strong, clear manifestations of power. But God was not in those. And then it says there was a low whisper. The technical translation of it is there was a thin silence. And again, the voice speaks. What are you doing here, Elijah? The assumption is that he will answer the question differently this time. And he doesn't. Elijah is so focused in on himself and on his internal struggles that he can't even see what God is trying to show him in the moment. And then God tells him in that whisper to go back to Damascus. Make clear, God says, go back north. Go back to where they're trying to kill you. And he tells him to do three things to anoint Jehu to be king over Israel, to anoint Hazael to be king over Syria, and to anoint Elisha to be the prophet to take his place. What's going on here? He tells Elijah, your job's not done. You need to go finish your work. There's a little bit of a, Elijah, get over yourself and get back to work. So what do we make out of that, though? These powerful demonstrations in this whisper. What's the point? What is God trying to show him? Elijah had longed for revival to take place. He had longed for Baal worship to be wiped out. And he thought that God would do it, number one, through this massive manifestation of his power like you saw at Mount Carmel. And Elijah thought that he would be the one that God would do it through. It's a reminder that in the scheme of things, we can't see the big picture. And we don't know our place and our role in the kingdom of God. You don't know what God is doing. Elijah thought his role was to be the Billy Graham of his day in this one way, to have this great revival follow him, or to be the Jonathan Edwards in that way that started the Great Awakening. Elijah's role here is to go prepare the way for others. And God is going to wipe out Baal worship, but it's not going to be in this very big, powerful, visible way that we expect. It's going to be in a very quiet way, a very normal way. Ahab is going to die in battle. That happened all the time to kings. And a new king will take the throne. And there will be some wars between the kings. But in the midst of all this, and just something simple as these transitions of power, and something as simple as one king dying and another king being anointed, God is going to move the people of Israel away from Baal worship. In a subtle, quiet, providential, low whisper. It's not what Elijah had expected. But Elijah didn't know the hand of God. And he didn't know what God was doing. And even then, Elijah thought, he looked around and thought, I'm the only one left. There's no one else like me that follows God, who worships him. And God says, you don't know this, but I have kept for myself 7,000 who have not bowed the knee, who have not kissed Baal. This idea, you first see it come up here, of a faithful remnant will become important through the rest of the Old Testament and into the New Testament. But God says, Elijah, you don't know what I'm doing. I think a lot of times we find ourselves in the place of Elijah. And we think we know what's best. And we think we know what God should do. And he doesn't do it. Or maybe there's something that you've longed for. Maybe it's a good thing. And maybe it feels like God has been harsh in withholding something from you. Why would Elijah had devoted his life, the only thing that he wanted was for revival to break out. Why would God withhold that? Is God being harsh? Elijah doesn't understand what's going on. Elijah feels like he's wasted his life, but God has a plan, and Elijah can't see that plan. And he can't see what lies ahead. And you and I are the same. I'll give you an analogy. If you think about driving back from Albany at night, and it's a little under 30 miles to get back here to Morgan, and when you're driving at night, you got your low beams on, you can only see a little ways ahead of you right there. You put your high beams on and you get on a straightaway, you can see a bit further, but you can't see around the curve. And if you think about it, even on the longest straightaway, even with your high beams on, and even if you have one of those extra lights, the floodlights and everything that you can put on there, you really can't see that far. When you look at the scheme of things and how long the journey is, what can you see? I don't know. Half mile, maybe a mile? Out of 30? You really can't see that far ahead. The same is true in your life. And I can prove it. A year ago, nobody would have guessed that life would look like it does right now. Elijah's job was not to plan it out for God. Elijah's job was not to tell God how to do it. Elijah's job was to be faithful. Your job and my job is not to tell God how to do it. I love to try to do that. My job is to be faithful. Faithful as a husband, faithful as a father, faithful as a church member, faithful as a disciple of Jesus Christ, to make other disciples, to evangelize, to share that truth, and to let my life be a light, to be that city on the hill, to be that salt of the earth that God has called us to be. Our job is to be faithful with what we have been tasked with here. That's why what does God tell Elijah? You expect him to reveal this great plan. All right, let me tell you all that I was doing. He tells Elijah, here's what you need to go do. Elijah's job is to be faithful. And here's the thing. Elijah doesn't finish all that well. He goes and he finds Elisha to be his successor, but there's no record of him actually anointing Elisha. And the interaction seems like Elijah is pretty half-hearted about it. Elisha has to go anoint Jehu, and there's nothing about Hazael being anointed. It seems that Elijah battles with this darkness the rest of his ministry. And it might seem that God was being harsh with him and withholding from him the one thing that he wanted, a good thing. Sometimes we feel like that too, like God is being harsh. But we see that the story doesn't end there. And we see God's kindness to Elijah. You remember what Elijah prayed? He prayed that God would take his life, that he would die. We find out as we get into 2 Kings that when it's time for Elijah's ministry on earth to end, he doesn't die. When it's time for Elijah to come home, God says, send the chariot. And a chariot of fire comes and sweeps Elijah off of this earth in a way that no other servant of God had ever been taken before. And if you needed any more affirmation of God's goodness to it, that's not the end of the story. Matthew 17, Jesus is with his disciples, and he appears on the mountain in all of his glory. And there with him are Moses and Elijah. And God is saying, you wanted revival in Israel. You wanted to know what my plan was. This was my plan. This is what I was moving toward all along. You didn't know it. Elijah, you are not the one that is to turn back the hearts of the sons to their fathers. You are not the one. This is the one. This is the Messiah. And you see God's goodness to Elijah. You see the honor that is shown to Elijah. God is not harsh. He is good and he is gracious. So it comes back to those questions that we started out with. If you battle through the darkness of depression, one of the mistakes of that is being like Elijah and isolating yourself. Get help. Reach out. Invite someone in. Let someone carry that burden with you. And it doesn't make you less of a Christian. And if you sit back and you look at where things are in our country and you've experienced frustration, discouragement, remember that God is still at work. And remember that he does things in his own time. And just like Elijah, your job and mine is to be found faithful.